Hello, this is Kathy Lewis from Financial Information Systems, and welcome to this Concur webinar. In this webinar, we're going to look at the process for entering expense reports. You're currently looking at the Concur homepage. Before we delve into expense reports, I just want to take a couple minutes, though, to look at the request feature, because it's important to understand the link between request and expense. Now, requests have a couple purposes. Some departments require that before travel is booked, that an online request be entered and approved. So you can use this feature if your department requires that. So let's say I wanted to attend a conference, and I've already started a request. So I'm going to put the request header in and just fill it in with the required information. Anytime you're filling out a request, pay attention to the fields that are marked with the red line. So just the name of the conference, the travel dates, where I'm going to be traveling to, etc. And we'll come back to this, how are you booking travel, in a moment. Then what you would put in are segments. So I might have already looked up airfare and have an idea. Let's say this conference is in Boston, and I have an idea how much it's going to cost to fly. Maybe the conference sponsor is giving rates for hotels, and I have that information. So I can put that information in under segments. Then what you would do is submit this, and once approved, you would be able to go into travel to actually book the trip. At the request header, where it says, how are you booking travel, I would choose option 2, that I'm putting in a request prior to any online booking and that it requires approval. Now, another reason why you might want to enter a request is if you need the assistance of Anthony Travel. So let's say I'm going to this conference, but I am also taking maybe, let's say I'm a faculty member and I'm taking 5 or 6 graduate students with me. And I'd like the assistance of Anthony Travel to help book their airfare and hotel. So before I contact Anthony Travel, they're going to ask for a request number. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to enter a request, putting in my header information, putting in any segment information that I can about the trip, and then submit, and it will auto approve. Now, in that case, I'm choosing option 2 for how are you booking travel. So I'm going to choose option 3 here. Option 3. I'm requesting that Anthony Travel assist with the booking. And when I submit this request, it's going to auto-approve, and it will generate this request number. So then I can contact Anthony Travel and provide them with this number, and they'll be able to assist with the booking. Now, even if I'm not required to use the request feature, I just want to go in, I have the approval of my department to travel, I don't have to submit a formal request, I don't need the assistance of Anthony Travel, so I just go in and use the travel feature to book my travel. When I book my travel, the final part of booking is a couple confirmation pages. And the last confirmation page it will bring up is this one. And again, you go back to how are you booking travel, and I'm going to choose, in this case, option 1. That this request was auto-created from a travel booking, and it was auto-approved. And then I would just complete the confirmation. So when I go in to enter expense reports, I can also start one from the request level. So every booking of travel in the system, whether it was Anthony Travel Assisted, or I started from a formal request, or I just went in and book my travel, and again, remember, it will auto-generate the request for me. So any booking of travel in the system creates a request. And if I start my expense report at this level, I just find the request associated with my trip, and under Action, I can click Expense. And it's going to start the expense report for me. So my header is already completed from the information I put in my when I booked my travel. So it knows where I want to go. It knows the dates of my travel, the purpose, etc. It also shows a default charge account number, and this comes from my profile settings. So starting your expense report by going into Request saves you that data entry time. Now, let's say maybe you want to enter an expense report, but the travel was not booked in the Concur system. You can still enter an expense report, but we're not going to start at Request. We're just going to start at the expense level, and I'm going to click on Create a New Report. So it brings up the same screen. I just have to enter this information manually because it's not pulling it in from my travel booking. So let's suppose I am entering an expense report for a one-day trip that I took to the Greensburg campus to attend a meeting. Again, I'm going to fill out my header, pay attention to the fields that are marked with this red line. And I'll put my dates of travel in. Notice that you can use this application for non-travel. So if someone has an out-of-pocket expense, maybe it was an emergency supply not related to travel, you will be able to reimburse them under non-travel. But I'm going to choose domestic. And then again, pay attention to the fields marked in red. Make sure you don't skip over them. And I'm going to choose a default department number. You only have to enter this one time and the system will remember it. So I can enter the values individually in the account number segments, but since I've entered them before, the system remembers the value I entered and I can just select it. If I want to use a reference number, I can enter that or just populate it with zeros. If I had started my expense report by going under Request, this would automatically populate for me. And I'm going to click on Next. Travel allowances message comes up. Am I receiving a per diem for meals? And for this example, I'm going to say no. I'm just going to be claiming mileage for using a personal car and also the cost, the actual cost of a meal. Now, available expenses shows up. These are expenses that were put on my travel card. So let's assume that these are not relevant to the current report. So I'm just going to close this, and it will bring up the different expense types. So the first expense is going to be mileage for using my personal car. It will open up this mileage calculator, and the first thing it wants to know are your waypoints. Where did you begin your travel? Where did you end your travel? If I started travel from the Oakland campus, that's what I'm going to enter as my starting point. But if I started travel from home, then that should be my beginning point. So let's say I did in fact travel from home to the Greensburg campus and then back home. And then I'll put my destination in. And it might be an address that I have, or it could just be a description. And I'm going to click on Calculate Route. So it brings up a prescribed route, which may or may not be the actual route that I traveled. And if it wasn't, this is the Turnpike to Route 30. If this isn't the way I traveled, I can just click on it and drag it to indicate the actual route. Or I can select from under suggested routes. But we'll just assume this is the way I traveled. And let's say I did travel round trip, and it calculates my mileage. Now, if this trip was taken on a normal business day, and I normally drive to work, I should be deducting my normal commute from home to the Pitt campus from my mileage. So I'm going to click on Deduct Commute. Now, I've done this example before, so it remembers my home address and my office address. It displays the mileage. So again, I traveled, let's say, on a normal business day. I normally drive to work, so I'm deducting my commute round trip from this business mileage. And here's the total business and my personal. And I'm going to click on Add Mileage to Expense. Now, pay attention again to the fields marked in red. If any of them are still empty, just complete them. Comments will be able to be seen by your approver. If I would need to go back and modify anything for that expense, I could go back to the mileage calculator, but I'm just going to click on Save. If I had traveled on, let's say, a weekend, maybe I'm traveling to the airport and I'm going to a conference, and the conference begins on a Saturday, and maybe I left home and drove to the airport, I would not have to deduct my normal commute, because that's not a business day. Also, if I don't typically drive to work, maybe I take a bus, then I would not have to deduct that commute. Since I entered a comment, that shows up here under the Comment tab. Let's say I have a second expense, and it's the cost of lunch. So I'm just going to claim actual meal cost in lieu of per diem. When you're traveling, entering expense reports, it will remember sites that you may have used before. They will show up in a drop-down. You can put comments in and save. If the system requires receipts, it will notify you of that via an icon. We don't see a receipt icon for either of these expenses, so I do not have to attach one. If I have a receipt for a meal and maybe I do want to attach it, I'll be able to use Attach Receipt. And we'll look at this in more detail in the next example. But once you're ready to submit, all you have to do is click Submit Report. Now, if you're working as a delegate, instead of the button saying Submit Report, it's going to say Notify Employee. When you're working as a delegate and you're ready to submit a report, it has to be reviewed by the traveler first. So you would click on Notify Employee. They will be notified via email that an expense report is awaiting their review. They can review it, click on Submit, and it will go through your department approval workflow. Once it gets department approval, it will go to payment processing for their review and payment. You'll see this final review come up with agreement language, and it's basically just asking you to click accept and submit that you verify these are legitimate expenses that adhere to university travel policy. And then I see a confirmation that it was successfully submitted, and I can also see a review of the report total and the amount due the employee, which in this case is the same. In the next example, we'll see where the amount due the employee might be a little bit less than the report total. Just going to close. And I will see this show up on my dashboard, and I can see the status was submitted and that it's now pending approval. If for some reason I wanted to pull this back, I can just click anywhere on this link. Maybe I forgot to add another expense or I need to adjust amounts. There'll be a recall button. And if I click recall, it pulls it out of the queue that it's sitting in. I have it back on my desktop and I can continue working in it. Anytime I want to refresh my screen, I can just click again on expense and it will take me back to the expense dashboard. And now I can see that this was returned. Let's go through another example, and let's say this is for a lengthier trip. Let's say I went to a conference and I'm claiming meals and lodging and a few other expenses. So I'm going to click on Create a New Report. And the dates of travel. Let's say I traveled last month from the 6th through the 10th of February. And we'll say that I went to a conference, an Oracle conference in Las Vegas. And I'll put in a default charge account. Now, the default number that's displaying in the report header area will serve as a default number on your expense report. Remember the previous example, I didn't change the default number for the individual expenses, so they both got charged to this default header account. Now, in this example, I'll show you how you can change the default or how you can change the account number for individual line items. And I'm going to click on Next. And are you traveling and receiving a per diem? And in this example, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to claim a per diem for my meals. Now, per diem uses an itinerary feature. Itineraries is information about your trip. And the per diem feature uses the itinerary to capture where you travel to and the dates of your travel. So if travel was booked in the system, all you have to do is click on Import Itinerary, and it will pull in that information from the booking of your trip. It will know where you went to and the dates that you traveled. Now, if travel was not booked in the system, you have to create an itinerary. And you do that by entering these itinerary stops. So I traveled from Pittsburgh, and I left on February 6th in the morning. I traveled to Las Vegas and arrived on the same day several hours later. So that's my first itinerary stop. Now, my second stop is the return trip, Las Vegas back to Pittsburgh. And I left on the 10th. in the afternoon and arrived back same day that evening. So here's my itinerary. Now, if I went from Pittsburgh to Las Vegas, and then I was doing business in Houston, and then I returned to Pittsburgh, that would be an extra stop. Pittsburgh to Las Vegas to Houston, Houston back to Pittsburgh. If I have layovers, maybe I couldn't get a direct flight from Pittsburgh to Las Vegas, so it went from Pittsburgh to Houston for a 1-hour layover and then Houston to Las Vegas. I do not have to include layover sites when I'm creating an itinerary. Just my final destination, where you're doing your business, where you're staying at night. Okay, so I'm going to click Next. Just click on my itinerary and click Next. And it uses this information to put in my per diem information. So it displays the daily per diem for Las Vegas and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, if any of these meals were provided and I don't want reimbursed for them, I'm going to click on the checkbox for the provided meal. So let's say on this first day I had breakfast at home. On each day of the conference, lunch was provided by the conference sponsor. And also on this particular day, I conducted a group business meeting that included a meal, and I'm claiming the cost of that meal via the group business meal. Maybe I paid out of pocket for it. So being that I'm being reimbursed via group business meal, I can't double dip, so I'm going to exclude that dinner on this day. And notice that it automatically reduces my per diem for that day according to what meals were provided. And I'm just going to click on Create Expense. It adds that per diem information to my expense report. Notice that it does give me the daily breakdown. It shows me dates in reverse order. I like to see them my first day of travel to my last, so I'm just going to click on this date arrow and it will reverse the order. Okay. Again, it's showing me available expenses. So let's say I have a travel card and my lodging was put on the travel card, and I also rented a car, and that was put on the travel card. When I see available expenses, these are expenses that were on the travel card. That's what this green icon with these horizontal lines is indicating. If I hover over it, I see the credit card expense. Now, the credit cards are actually MasterCards. These are just like dummied up expenses. That's why it says American Express. So if I want to add these expenses to my expense report, even though these are not out-of-pocket expenses, they do need to be accounted for in the expense report. So I'm just going to select the relevant expenses to this expense report, and I'm going to choose Move to the current report. And now they show up as expense items. Now notice, let's look at lodging. Notice I see a red exclamation point. Think of a red icon as like a stop. It's not going to allow you to submit the expense report if you don't take care of whatever the issue might be. So it's telling you here that there's an exception and that itemizations are required for lodging. So when you enter lodging, it wants to see a daily breakdown of charges. So to do that, all I have to do is click on lodging and go to nightly lodging expenses. Now, it captured the checkout date from pulling this expense in from the credit card. I can put my number of nights in. Let's say I stayed 4 nights. And from that, it will put in my check-in date. Then what I enter are my daily charges. So there could be the daily room rate, the daily taxes, maybe there's internet charges per day. So I'm breaking it down into the daily charges. Now, to make this a little bit easier, notice that there's a box here that says you are permitted to combine the room rate and taxes into one single entry. And I do recommend you do this just to make it a little simpler. Now, being that these are just like dummied up expenses, the lodging is only coming in at $65. So I'm going to put in a low room rate so I don't exceed that amount. And again, let's say the room rate and the taxes comes out to $12 a day. I'm combining it. And let's say that there was a daily charge for internet access. And maybe any other daily charges. And I'm going to click on Save Itemizations. Now, when you do an itemization, the system will alert you as to whether you did it correctly. So here's my total charge. Here's what I've itemized. I left something else. So $9.06 hasn't been accounted for yet. So I have to finish itemizing. It might be another daily charge, or maybe it's just a one-time charge. Let's say maybe while I was traveling, I also was working on a grant and I needed to send it out via express mail, overnight mail. The hotel took care of that for me and said, I'll just add that onto your hotel bill. So I'm going to add that additional charge, and this was overnight mail. And I was sending my grant to my funding agency. And I'm going to save that. Now notice that that exception, that red icon has disappeared, so I no longer have an issue. If I click on this down arrow, I can compress the lodging, or I can see all the detail. So I can collapse it or view the detail. Here's my daily charges. Here's that one additional charge. And again, I can collapse. Now, when you see an icon that's yellow that looks like a piece of paper, that indicates that this expense is requiring a receipt. So all I have to do is click on the expense and go to Attach Receipt. Maybe the receipt is on my computer drive. Maybe I scanned it and saved it as a JPEG or a PDF, and I just want to browse my directories and upload it from my directories. So you can do it that way. Or maybe my traveler took pictures of receipts and now they're displaying here under Available Receipts. Now, obviously you can't see the detail here, but if I click on the magnifying glass, it will open these up so you can view the detail to pick the right receipt. But once you determine the right receipt, just select it and click Attach. And now if I hover over this check mark, I can see the attached receipt. So I can do the same for car rental. It also wants a receipt. So I'm just going to select the line item and go to Attach Receipt. Browse my directories or select it from the Available Receipts. So the thing you have to be careful about is, in this system, you attach receipts to the individual line items. in internet expenses, you were attaching receipts to just the report. You would combine all the receipts like into one file and just attach it to the report. But in this system, receipts get entered to the individual expense item. Okay, so let's say I have one additional expense and it was a group business meal. So I'm going to click on New Expense. And there's multiple options for group business meals, less than 10, greater than 10. If it was maybe a reception for a recruitment process, maybe prospective students, and it's a reception for 50 people, then you want to choose the appropriate category here, receptions. But let's say I traveled to a conference and I'm a member of a board, and during that conference one evening I conducted a board meeting with a couple other board members, and I paid for their meals. So I'm going to choose group business meal less than 10. And just put in the date of the event. And maybe we had this business meeting and the meal at the hotel. Dollar amount was $240. Now, just like you did in internet expenses, you do want to add your list of attendees. So I can add attendees a couple ways. I can click on New Attendee and then just enter that person's name and click Save. And I can also choose whether they're alumni, board members, etc. Just choose the appropriate category here. If I've conducted business meetings before with these individuals, they're already going to be known to the system and they're going to show up under favorites. So let's say maybe we have these meetings every 6 months, and I can just select them from the favorite list and add them that way. And I'm going to save. Now, if we look at the icons here, I can see my list of attendees. I can see comments that this was a board meeting. It wants a receipt. So I'm going to attach a receipt. Now, this caution sign is indicating that there's an exception. And if I look at the top of my screen, what I'm able to see here is that I've exceeded policy for group business meals. I have 3 people in attendance, myself and 2 other people. The cost per person was $80 a person. But policy states that group business meals might not, that they shouldn't exceed $70 a person. So it's saying that I either have to obtain a higher signature for this exception, or I have to mark the balance as personal. So depending on your departmental policy, how they want to handle this, if your department says yes, they will approve this, you're going to need the signature of a dean director or department head stating that they will approve this exception to policy, and you're going to want to attach that as another receipt to this line. If your department says that they cannot reimburse above the $70 per person, then the $30 that I went over, the policy amount, I should be deducting via a personal expense. And I can do that by itemizing. So I'm still on my line, and I'm going to click Itemize. And I'm going to choose Personal Expense. And it's going to be the amount that I went over policy, the $30. And maybe this was just because it was an expensive meal. Maybe there was alcohol and the department doesn't reimburse for that. So put some type of comment in and save. So I have my first part of the itemization in, and notice that it shows $30, but under requested it shows 0. So when you put a line item in as a personal expense, it's going to deduct that from the reimbursable amount. Now, notice I still have the $210 since I'm itemizing. I have the remaining amount that I have to account for. So I'm going to add another itemization, and this will be the group business meal. And this is the $210. I do have to put my attendees in again, but again, I could put those, select them just from under favorites. And save. Here's my itemization. And again, I can see the details or I can collapse it. But now I see the total amount, and the amount requested is $210 minus the $240 minus the $30. If I want to charge expenses to something other than the header account, I can do that under details. Now, if you're changing your allocations, the easiest way to do this is to enter all your expense details and allocations. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is select the lines that I'm charging to a different account. So I can select individual line items, or maybe I can select all of them just by clicking the icon next to the checkbox next to date. And then I'm going to click on allocate these selected expenses. Now, I might be charging everything 100% just to a different account number, or I might also be doing a split allocation. If I'm doing a split allocation, I can just click on Add New Allocation, and I could put in dollar amounts or percentages, and then put the appropriate account number in. If I'm charging everything just to a different account number, I just have to change my values. So maybe in this example, I just wanted to go to a different reference number. Notice that you don't see subcode here. These expenses are hard-coded to specific subcodes, so you cannot change those subcodes. If you want to see a listing of the subcodes that expenses are hard-coded to, you will be able to find that listing on the Travel and Expense Management website. So I'm going to save my allocation. And click Done. Now I can see an additional icon that looks somewhat like a wheel or sort of like a pie chart, and that indicates that the expense is charged to an account different than the header account. And if I hover over it, it will show me the account that's being charged. Now, if I don't want to check the account for each line, maybe I just want to see in total how the allocation was done, again, I can go under Details and Allocations and Summary. and I can see that the total of the report is being charged to this one account. Now, notice in this example, we see two columns. One says amount, one says requested, and they're different. So the amount column shows the total dollar amount of the report. The requested amount is total amount of the report minus personal expenses. So think of the total requested as the total amount that will hit your departmental general ledger account. This is not necessarily, though, the amount the employee is being reimbursed. In this example, we have two expenses that were charged to a travel card. So being that those were not out-of-pocket expenses, the employee doesn't get reimbursed for those. Those are on the travel card. So if I go under details and look at totals, again, I see the report total minus personal expenses and the total requested amount. I will see the total amount that it was put on the travel card. When you see PIT CBCP, that's the travel card amount. So it's going to deduct that from the amount claimed and give you the amount due the employee. And when I'm ready to submit, I'm going to click on Submit Report. If I'm acting as a delegate, it's going to say Notify Employee. If I don't want to submit it yet, this will automatically get saved. I'll be able to go back to my home page and work on it at a later time. And I'm going to click Submit. Accept. And it will show me that same summary, and I'm going to close that, and this will show up on my dashboard, and it will show me the current status of it. Now I have an expense report that's already started that I want to show you regarding split distributions and how you'll be able to charge to departments outside of your immediate home department. So in this example, we have an expense for inoculation. So let's say I'm going to be traveling out of the country. The countries I'm going to do require vaccinations, and I've already had that taken care of, and before I actually start my trip, let's say I want reimbursed for these inoculations. So I've done an expense report. I have a receipt attached. And I've done my allocations. In this example, I am splitting charges between two different departments. And you can see here the department numbers. So let's say my trip, I'm going to be traveling for payment processing and financial information systems. When I enter charge accounts, this system will actually give me the ability to enter department numbers that fall outside of my home department. In the Internet Expenses system, you weren't able to do that because of security rules that were built into the system. This application does allow you to enter those numbers that belong to other departments. But what will happen when I submit this is going to go through additional approval workflow. So if I go under Details and look at the approval workflow, this is actually now going to go to two approvers. It will go to my home approver, and it will go to an approver called the Cost Object Approver. Now I'm in a training system, so I don't see the approval here, but I would actually see the name of the person who is the designated approver for that other department. Both approvers will get notification at the same time, so they're simultaneously notified to go in and approve this expense report. Both of them must approve before this will go to the final approval within payment processing. If one of them rejects it, it is not going to go to payment processing. It will come back to the preparer and the traveler. They would have the ability to edit and resubmit for approval. Now, there's one other expense report that I just want to bring to your attention, and this is one for a non-employee. You will have the ability to pay non-employees within this application. So I have one that's already been created for a guest speaker. So in this case, we have a guest speaker that we want to pay an honorarium to. Now, when you are creating an expense report for a non-employee, I'm going to go to the header area. The first thing you're going to do is when you're creating the header, you're going to change the policy to guest expense policy. Normally, this will default to PIT general policy. You're going to change it to guest policy. And then you complete the header with the appropriate information. So again, this is an honorarium for a guest speaker, the date of the event, etc. With guests, you do have the ability to pick up the check if you want to. Many times, especially if honorariums are being paid to someone who's coming on campus, people want to present that person with the check while they're here. So you can say, yes, I am picking up the check, and enter your contact information. So payment processing will be able to notify you when the check is ready. They do ask that you give them at least 4 days notification to prepare this payment. If this person has been paid before as a guest, they're going to be in our system as a vendor. Since they're not an employee, they are paid as a vendor. So they will already be in our system as a vendor if they've been paid before, so you'll be able to select their name. But if this is the first time they're being paid as a guest, then what you do when you are preparing this, you go ahead and enter the expense. So you can see there is an expense type for honorarium, fill in the appropriate information, the name of the person being paid, how much you're paying them, any comments. And then there is an expense type that says new vendor supporting documentation. So if this is a new vendor, we need to get them set up in the system as a vendor, and you need to provide a W-9. So you use this expense type, new vendor supporting documentation, and attach the W-9 the same way that you would attach a receipt. So you want to have a signed W-9, attach it as a receipt. You don't have to put any dollar amount in here. This is just a method for you to attach that W-9. And then you would submit this. So once it gets your department approval, it's going to go to payment processing. They will be able to set this person up as a vendor and then go ahead and make that payment and cut the check for this person. If you need assistance when you're entering expense reports, you can call the Panther Express Customer Service Help Desk. Also, remember that there is a full user guide on the Travel and Expense Management website that you can access for additional details. There is a expenses quick reference card. There are also Captivate demos that demo for you the different expense features. So I hope this has been helpful, and thank you for watching this webinar.